Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Many of you have heard the term emotional intelligence, or maybe you've heard emotional quotient or EQ. Those two terms are used interchangeably, and they're basically looking at a specific type of intelligence, in this case, emotional intelligence. In this episode, I want to take that concept a little bit further and put it in the content of the workplace. Specifically, this episode will look at emotional intelligence in leadership. Let's start by defining emotional intelligence or emotional quotient or EQ. What it comes down to is basically this. Emotional intelligence is a person's ability to be aware of their emotions, to control their emotions, and to express their emotions in ways that are productive and appropriate. But taking it a step further, it's also a person's ability to handle interpersonal relationships in such a way that those relationships are productive, not in such a way that they're destructive or detrimental to one's experience. So it's not a difficult definition when it comes to emotional intelligence. It's a type of intelligence that pertains to one's emotions. And when we consider what would it mean to be emotionally intelligent, it's easy to understand that being aware of, being in control of, and being able to properly and appropriately express one's emotions is key. We could say that emotional intelligence truly is the key to both professional and personal success. When we consider EQ and its significance in leadership, think about your interactions, whether you are in a leadership position or you are interacting with someone in a leadership position. Consider how important it is for the person in leadership to have a high EQ, to have a high enough emotional intelligence in order to conduct themselves in such a way that it enhances rather than hinders their leadership abilities and leadership success. When we consider the significance of emotional intelligence in leadership, there are 4 essential competencies that are important to mention here. First is self-awareness. There is no emotional intelligence without proper self-awareness on the part of the leader. Self-management is the second competency to consider. If you are aware of your emotions as a leader, but are not able to properly manage them, self-awareness does very little for you. The other part, the other component or competency of emotional intelligence in leadership is social awareness. But you also have to be able to tell what is going on around you. What is the emotional feedback from those around you, from those under your leadership? And the fourth of the essential competencies when it comes to emotional intelligence in leadership is relationship management. You can be aware of everything else, but if you fail at managing your relationships with other people, then your high EQ isn't as high as maybe you thought it would be or you thought it was. So this is something for everyone in leadership to consider. If you want a high EQ, you want to make sure that you review these 4 essential competencies and how they play into your emotional intelligence in terms of your leadership ability and success. So remember self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So it comes down to very basically the self and others with whom you interact. Generally speaking, what are the key components of EQ? First and foremost, the self-awareness, and I already mentioned that a couple of times. If you don't know what's going on with your emotions, what chance do you have of being successful in terms of emotional intelligence? Not very likely to happen. The other part is empathy. And this goes back to social awareness and relationship management, if you think about it. You really have to be aware not just of yourself and your emotions, but also of the emotions of others and what's going on around you emotionally, both from individuals and from groups collectively. So these are very important when you as a manager, you as a leader specifically, are considering your own EQ and how it can contribute to your leadership success, or how it may hinder it if that's the case. And of course, most people can use a little bit of help in terms of making things better. You may have a high EQ, you may do well, but who out there can honestly say that they don't need any improvement? Let's consider how leaders can develop EQ or improve their EQ. First and foremost, one of the simplest things that I can suggest is active listening. I say simplest because active listening is not always easy. Some people are better at it than others, but active listening is one of those things that even if you're not good at it today, you can certainly improve. You can get better at it. So practice active listening. Close your mouth and open your ears and understand what people are saying. Ask questions to clarify. And don't be so quick with a response or a reply. Don't worry about formulating a reply. Worry about actually listening to the words and to the message that is coming across. The other thing to consider when working on developing one's EQ are emotional regulation techniques. This is something that you can look up in books, online, or from a therapist or a counselor. There are many different emotional regulation techniques that you can practice in order to not only recognize your emotions as a leader, but also to regulate them, to really have a handle on your own emotions, which are often associated with behaviors. So building your emotional regulation techniques is key when it comes to developing EQ. The other thing to consider, which is very important for leaders in general, but especially if you are a leader working on developing your EQ, is building rapport with your employees. Sometimes leaders can be isolated from the rest of the workforce. Whether you're in the ivory tower or not, your responsibilities and tasks and workload alone can make it very easy to be isolated from employees. But building the rapport with employees, being purposeful and intentional in that exercise can go a long way when it comes to EQ. Because remember, again, not only is self-awareness and self-management critical, you also want social awareness and relationship management. So this is where building rapport is critical for developing EQ. And when you look at all of that together, simply committing to learning and development in the arena of emotional intelligence is what's going to bring you that much closer to developing your EQ, to improving your EQ. Whether that learning is formal or informal, that's your choice, and I would suggest a combination of both. But remember that in order to develop your EQ as a leader, it's not going to happen overnight and it's not going to happen magically. You absolutely have to make an effort and make it intentional. So you may think that EQ sounds great and everybody should focus on EQ, especially those in leadership positions. But is there really a big impact on employees, on the team? As a matter of fact, research indicates that team performance can be greatly impacted by their leaders' EQ, or emotional quotient, or emotional intelligence. First and foremost, high EQ can help a leader to manage their own emotions effectively. When that is the case, when a leader is effectively managing their own emotions, this automatically helps to build trust and credibility. When it comes to team performance, when it comes to interacting with the leader, when it comes to their own interactions within the team, a leader's EQ can definitely impact trust and credibility within the team. It can also lead to higher employee retention, to things like higher satisfaction rates, positive workplace culture. It can help to engage employees. It can help to reduce stress and burnout. All of those, by themselves or collectively, are enough for any and every leader to focus on developing their EQ. Beyond that, well-developed EQ can improve communication skills, which can then foster clearer interactions. It can improve conflict resolution. It can promote empathy and understanding. It can increase team motivation or team morale. It can come across as supportive, effective leadership. It can lead to better decision making. It can lead to collaboration and cooperation. And it can definitely encourage adaptability, which is critical for changing environments and for different kinds of challenges, which is quite the norm for many companies and many teams. So if you were on the fence in terms of why EQ is important to you, not only as a leader, but also to your team, that was just a list of a few examples of what studies and research have found to be the benefits of higher EQ among leaders. So as you can see, a higher EQ will not only benefit the individual leader, it will benefit his or her team, and by extension, it will also benefit the organization as a whole. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Emotional intelligence, or emotional quotient, or EQ, as it may be known by you, is critical when it comes to leadership. EQ refers to one's ability to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions in a way that is productive and positive. EQ can play a key role in your success, whether it's professional or personal, and it can be extremely significant in your leadership abilities and success. The episode also addressed the 4 essential competencies that can have a significant impact on leadership and the workplace dynamics, and those were self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And remember that leaders have the responsibility to develop their EQ. Even if you think you're already a top performer when it comes to emotional intelligence, chances are there's room for growth and improvement. So things like active listening, emotional regulation techniques, and building rapport with your employees can be critical to helping you to develop your EQ. And of course, there has been many studies indicating the tremendous potential impact of the leader's emotional intelligence on the team and its performance. Everything from trust and credibility to a positive workplace culture to employee engagement and better morale and motivation. There are many reasons why a higher EQ can translate into the success of a team and therefore an organization. As the week unfolds, I encourage you to consider emotional intelligence and how it affects you, whether you're looking at your own emotional intelligence or the emotional intelligence of those around you. And I encourage you to look at both. And you don't have to be in a leadership position to have a good understanding of what emotional intelligence for you and for those around you really is presently, and how it affects you, your relationships, and the environment around you. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of the podcast. And while you're there, check out some of the other videos which focus on stress management. So go to YouTube and check out Stress Free with Dr. G. The link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.